Okay, we're up to Daf Yomi Aleph for 11 lines into the page. So the Gemara is continuing its discussion of the Shita Rav Anan. Now, Rav Anan's Shita is a little bit difficult to wrap our brain around because we clearly don't paskin like it. And we're all used to not paskening like it. But Rav Anan's Shita is that if you have a Jew that eats kashrus, he's shomer kashrus, but he's oived avodah zara, he could shecht. That's a pella, obviously, because we don't paskin this way. We paskin that if you're oived avodah zara, you have a din of a goy. You're mumulachol terakula, and you're puzzle, and you have the status of a goy mamish. But the Gemara of Anan disagrees. Rav Anan says we look at each mitzvah in an isolated case. You want a shecht, which means the question is, are you trustworthy when it comes to kashrus? If you're makbid on kashrus, I don't care what else you do, so you could shecht. That's Rav Anan Shita, and the Gemara will continue in this discussion. Le'masei have a raya to Rav Anan that even if someone is oived avodah zara, as long as they're makbid on kashrus, you could trust them, they could shecht. I have a Gemara on by my seat. So the Gemara says, the pasuk tells us regarding Eliyahu Navi, that Eliyahu Navi was told by Hashem to hide in a cave. And the pasuk says, Ha'arvim mevia loy lechem, the ravens, Arvim, would bring him bread every day, ubasar b'bayker v'lechem ubasar b'erev, and they would bring him meat. Now where did this meat come from? So the Gemara says, V'amar Rav Yudam Rav, mebei tabchi da'achav. This meat was shechted by Achav. Now, Achav was makbid on kashrus. We don't have a source that he wasn't makbid on kashrus. He was an oived avodah zara. He was a terrible, terrible person. But we don't have a source that he wasn't makbid on kashrus. He was shechting the basar, and Eliyahu Navi was receiving the basar in the cave, and he ate it. So you see that Eliyahu Navi ate the shchita of Achav, even though Achav was oived avodah zara. So says Rav Anan, it's a raya that if someone is makbid on kashrus, which we don't have any reason to assume that Achav was not makbid on kashrus, so as long as someone's makbid on kashrus, even if oived avodah zara, you could shecht. And the raya is Eliyahu Navi ate Achav's meat. So the Gemara.
Why don't you say with pikuach nefesh?
So it's lav dafka. You don't have to have basar. Pikuach nefesh. Eliyahu Navi could survive on lechem alone. The Rishonim indicate that this is not pikuach nefesh, because if it was pikuach nefesh, he had lechem. He could survive on lechem. So the Gemara says, no, al pi hadibur shani. That's the exception. The fact that Hashem told him to go into the cave, and the fact that the ravens were bringing him the meat, the Gemara understands that it's similar to a hirasha. If a Navi comes down and says that Hashem told me that for a short period of time, this mitzvah is suspended, kashrus is suspended, the halacha is we listen to him. Eliyahu Navi understood that really Achav shchita is no good. Really, it's not kosher meat. But he understood that this was a gzeres hakasiv, that for whatever reason, Eliyahu Navi was supposed to eat that meat. And it was Hirasha. And how did he know this? Hashem never told him. Hashem told him to go into the cave, and he says, I'm going to supply the food. And the fact that Ravens brought this, Hirasha, it's lav dafka, you can't bring a raya to it. Now, before we continue in this discussion, the Gemara just wants to know who brought him the meat. The pasuk says Arvim. So my Arvim, what is the translation of Arvim? So Arvim Mamish. Amar Ravina, Arvim Mamish. Ravina says it was ravens. Arvim are ravens. So the Gemara wants to know, maybe the name Arvim, maybe Arvim was a name. And there were two guys who both had the same name, Arvim. Maybe Arv is a name. And there were two guys named Arvim. So the Gemara says, Arv was a rare name that we find in Tanakh. Milak Siv, we have in the pasuk, it says, V'yargus Arv, Bitsur Arv, Ve'ezev. They killed Arv at a city called Sur Oirav. Okay, but the point is, there's a guy named Oirav. So maybe there were two guys named Oirav who delivered the meat every day. So the Gemara says, Amalei Ravina responded, Isrami Milsa Tervaya have a Shemaya Arvim. What's the likelihood that there are two guys who have the name Oirav? And first of all, Rishonim point out, you don't even call multiple people, you don't call them Arvim. If there are two guys named Johns, you don't say Johnim. It's not even a terminology that would apply to multiple people by the same name. And what's the likelihood that the two guys who have the same, a very obscure name? The answer is Arvim is ravens. It's Raven Mamish. Now the Gemara says one more attempt at Arvim not being a raven. Vidilma al Shem Kaiman. Maybe Oirav is not a raven. Maybe Oirav was a city location. It was a city. And maybe they're called Arvim because they're from said city. Where do we find such a precedent that you could have a word that kind of sounds like someone's name, but it's really a definition of their town? Milaik Siv, the pasuk says, "Aram yatsu gedudim," and Aram went out armed with swords. The Yeshvu me'eret Yisrael, and they to return the captives that were taken from Eretz Yisrael. Nara ketana. And Nara ketana are descriptions of girls at different ages. So Or you a naira or you a katana. You can't be both. So says Gemara Chullin, Karli naira, Karli katana. Is this person that was taken captive a naira katana? The answer is Amar Padas katana de minurin. It's a girl that was from a place called Naira. So the point is, you see that the word Naira in that case means a city. So maybe Oiriv, also Arvim, is two people from the same city. So the Gemara says, Im kain Orviim mibayle. It wouldn't be Orvim, it would be Arviim, like Yehudiim. So from a Lashon, it's not from the same city, it must be Ravens Mamash. Okay. So you have Rav Anan Shita, that if someone is Ovid, Avodah Zara, but they're makbid on kashrus, they could shech. Now the Gemara is going to try to bring a raya from Rav Anan. Now this Gemara, if you did this yesterday, this should be very, very similar. This is a brayso that we had yesterday. Now yesterday we were trying to bring a raya to Rava. Rava's shita is that if you're a mummer for one specific mitzvah, you're still allowed to shech. Meaning that if Rava's shita was that a mummer l'teyavon, that let's say someone who he's not makbid on kashrus, but he's not a bad guy. He just doesn't really care enough. He'd rather save some money. If you give him a knife, he could shecht. We tried to bring a raya for Rava from this brisa, because this brisa indicates that there is a mummer that can shecht. So we thought it was talking about Rava, and the Gemara says, no, it's talking about Rav Anan. And this is how we got into this discussion, that really the mummer that the brisa refers to that could shecht is not referring to a mummer for nevelis, it's a mummer for avodah zara, but he's makbid on kashrus. So now the Gemara is going to try to bring a raya to Rav Anan from this brisa, and we're going to reject it, saying no, it's a raya to Rava. It's mamish yesterday's Gemara backwards. So the Gemara says, "Le Mesayele have a raya to Rav Anan." The brisa says, "Hakol shaychten." Anyone can check afilu kuti, even a kuti, afilu oral, and even an oral, someone who's uncircumcised, afilu yisrael mummer, and even a mummer. Now, what type of mummer we'll get to in a second. The Gemara says, "Hi oral hechidami." But before we get to mummer, let's try to figure out what is the case of an oral that he could shecht. Now, there's two different types of reasons why a person would be an oral. One is for medical purposes; he's not able to have a bris milah for medical purposes. It's dangerous. Now that can't be the pshat, because if someone is a good Yari Shemayim, he's a tzaddik, he just can't have a bris milah for medical purposes, do I need the brisa to tell me he could shecht? Of course he could shecht. He's a big rabbi. What's the shayla? The answer is, it means, why does someone else not have a bris milah? What if someone is a frum person, he doesn't leave in bris milah? He's called a mummer la'arelis. The chiddush is that he could shecht. So what do you see? That a mummer for one avera does not preclude him from shechting. Okay, that's the first part of the brisa, yeah?
But if we've seen that oral here means he's a mover for a raylos, why would it list them separately?
Because that's the point. We're going to get to it. So oral means a mummer la'arelos. Then we have to then define what's mummer, the next category. So it says the Gemara. Let's see it inside. Hi oral hechidami. What's the case of an oral who cannot circumcise, who's uncircumcised but can shecht? If it's someone who medically cannot have a bris milah, hayisrael malyahu. What I need a brisa for to say that he could be a shaychet? He's a Yisrael Yamalya. He's a Yari Shemayim. Elapshita mummer la'arelos. It must be rather he's a mummer la'arelos, which means that he's a frum person, but he doesn't believe in one mitzvah. The mitzvah that he doesn't believe in is a bris milah, and you see that he could still shecht. Okay, fair. Let's keep going. The next case, ema seifa, afilu yisrael mummer. Then a mummer can also shecht. Now we just got finished saying that an oral is a mummer. So what is now the difference between oral and mummer? The Gemara says, "Hey chidami, mummer l'davar echad, haynu mummer la'arelos. Elalav mummer l'avodah zara k'derav Anan." It must be mummer is someone. The mummer oral is someone who is a frum person but doesn't believe in one mitzvah, i.e., arelos. And then mummer who could shecht is someone who's makbid on kashrus but does avodah zara. Mamish Rav Anan's case, and you see a raya that someone who's a mummer avodah zara can still shecht. It's a raya to Rav Anan. So the Gemara says, "Loy, no, that case of mummer really Rav Anan, he can't shecht. If you do avodah zara, you're out. It's considered as if you violated the entire Torah." So what does it mean in the brisa that it says that a mummer can shecht? It's talking about Rava's case that we had yesterday, which is a mummer l'te'avon. As long as you give him the knife before, he could shecht, because we don't assume that he's going to try to mess you over. Loy, lo me'melach mummer l'avodah zara loy. Damer ma'ar chamur avodah zara shekol kaif b'akav ma'idil chol Torah kula. Avodah zara is equal to kol Torah kula. If you believe in Hashem, it's mamish ki'ilu mekayim kol Torah kula. If you believe in avodah zara, it's ki'ilu you're kaifer kol Torah kula. So really, a mummer avodah zara is out, not like Rav Anan. So what does it mean in the brisa when it says that he could shecht? We're talking about someone who's a mummer for nevelis. He's not makbid on kashrus, but not because he's a bad guy, not because he's fighting against Hashem, but because he's he wants to save some money, and kosher meat is more expensive. So such a person can still shech that it's a raya to Rava, not Ravanan. Okay, now we're going to put the final knockout on Ravanan, and this is the following brisa: Meisvei. Mikem. The pasuk is talking about who can bring a carbon. So Mikem means from amongst your people you could bring a carbon, which implies there are some Jews that cannot bring a carbon. Who's out? V'loi kulchem. Not everyone can bring a carbon. Who's out? Lohoitzis a mummer. A mummer is out. Okay. Now again, there are many different types of mummer. A mummer just means a renegade. A mummer is someone who's not makbid. You could have a mummer for one avera, you could have a mummer for chol terakul, you could have a mummer for avodah zarah, you could have a mummer for arelus, whatever it is. A mummer cannot bring a carbon. Let's keep going. Mikem bachem chalakti v'lei b'umos. But that distinction that a mummer cannot bring a carbon does not apply to a guy. Meaning, don't think that if a guy, if a Jew does avodah zarah, as we're going to see, he's out. If a guy does avodah zarah, he could still send the carbon. We're not as makbid on goyim as we are in Yidden. Okay, let's keep going. Min ha-behema, from the animal, which implies not everyone can donate an animal. Lahavi b'nei adam shedoim lebehema. Meaning, behema is inclusive, that even if you're like a behema, meaning at first we said that a mummer is out, but now we're saying min ha-behema, even if a Jew looks like a behema, mamish, like he's acting like an animal, he's no good, he could still donate a carbon. So by the way, this is a contradiction. You just got finished saying that a mummer cannot, but now you're telling me even if a Jew acts like a behema, he could donate a carbon. So it's like a mummer you said is out, but now you're saying even if you act like a behema, you're in.
So the mummer is like they're a good person. They have one mitzvah they're not doing.
So you act like a behema is also you could be a good person. But, it's like a nebuchapi curse. You could be a good person too, but you act like a behema. Halachically acting like a behema. Min behema lahavi b'nei adam shedaim lebehema. Even if a Jew acts like a behema, meaning he's oivid averis, he could still donate a carbon. Mikan amru mikablim karbonis mepoishe Yisrael. This is the source that we accept karbanas from sinners, because we don't want to push them off. We want to allow them to be able to come back. So we'll accept karbanas from sinners. Chutz min ha-mummer, except from a mummer. So by the way, this price is all over the place. It's like a mummer's out, but if you act like him, you're in, except if you're a mummer. So it's like, well, what's going on over here? Umenasech es yayin, or if you pour wine for avodah zarah, umechal Shabbos b'farhesia, or if you mechal Shabbos b'farhesia, you're out. By the way, this is the makar. This is the source that if someone's mechal Shabbos b'farhesia, you can't count the minyan, you can't touch the wine. This is the source. Rashi says, why is Chil Shabbos considered so significant? Why is Chil Shabbos so severe? So Rashi says, because it's not Shabbos. Shabbos is because Hashem created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. If you don't rest on the seventh, then maybe you don't believe Hashem created the world in the 6 days either. But that's why nowadays, if you have someone who's let's say Michal Shabbos, and not because they don't believe Hashem created the world, but because they were raised nafrum or whatever, so then these halachas are not necessarily applicable. So the point is,
That's one thing we're looking for, and it's supposed to Shmaya Ben Yisrael.
so the Gemara has a kasha. The kasha is this brisa is a bit of a contradiction. It's all over the place. It says a mummer's out, but then it says if you're acting like a behema, you're in. You could bring a carbon. Then it says except for a mummer, or someone who pours wine for avodah zarah, Michal Shabbos. So like, is a mummer in or is a mummer out? So says the Gemara, understand. Hagufa kasha. Amrim yikem v'lei kolchem. L'hoitzi a mummer. First he said a mummer cannot donate a carbon. V'hadar tani mekaben karbonos mepaishay so. But then he said he could. So what's going on over here? So the Gemara says halei kasha. Reisha mummer l'chol Torah. Mitzias mummer davrech. So the Gemara's first answer is as follows: what type of mummer are you? If you're a frum person, but there's one aver you're not makbid on, we accept your carbon. If you're someone who doesn't keep anything, you're out. Okay. Mummer l'chol Torah kula, out. Mummer l'davar echad, in. Here's the problem. Then the Brisa said, we won't accept a mummer. Let's say it's out. You just told me the rules. Mummer l'davar echad, I'm not makbid on one mitzvah, I'm in. I'm not makbid on any mitzvah, I'm out. It's binary, yes and no. Now then the Brisa says, a mummer is also out. What do you mean? You just told me. The answer is there's a third type of mummer, and that's someone who keeps kol Torah kula except for avodah zarah. And what do you see? If I keep all the mitzvahs except for kashrus, I'm still in. I can bring a carbon. If I keep all the mitzvahs except for shatnez, I'm still in. But there's one mitzvah that if you don't do, you're out. And that's Avodah Zarah. And you see, not like Rav Anan, that if someone is Oived Avodah Zarah, he's out. I don't care what else he does. Karfel l'chol Torah kula, and this is a tiyufta to Rav Anan. So the Gemara says, "Ema seifa." We keep going in the brayso. Chutz min hamomer menasech zayin mechal Shabbos v'hesya. There's certain averis, mumer, or someone who pours wine, or someone who's mechal Shabbos, he's out. I don't say you just got told. You finished telling me the rules about a mumer, which is if a mumer l'davar echad is in, mumer l'chal Torah kula is out. Then he said mumer is out. Well, what do you mean? You just got finished telling me the rules of a mumer. Hi mumer hechidami. I mumer l'chal Torah kula hi noresha. If it's referring to a mumer l'chal Torah kula, you already told me this. I mumer l'davar echad kasher mitziyasa. And if it's a mumer for one avera, you already told me that it's not like that. So what's this last line that a mumer is out? Elalav hachikamar. Chutz min hamumer lenasech hasayayin l'chal Shabbos v'hesya. You know what this mumer is? This is a mumer for Avodah Zarah. Alma mumer l'Avodah Zarah, have a mumer l'chol Torah kula, tiyufta, the Rav Anan, tiyufta. And this is a rejection of Rav Anan. Good. Now, the previous, that's the end of the discussion. Now, the previous brisa, Agav, had mentioned that that we do not accept karbanos from mumarim. If someone's a mumar, he's out. Again, different types. But the point is, the source that a mummer is a problem is from the pasuk of Mikem v'loy kulchem lohaitzias mummer. Okay. Here's the problem. There's another pasuk that excludes a mummer. So why do I need both? Whatever type of mummer is out, let's say it's a mummer for Avodah Zarah, or a mummer for Kol Torah Kula, whatever it is, the source that a mummer is out is Mikem. The problem is another pasuk. Isn't there a different source? Me'am ha'aretz. The pasuk says, go to the next page. Me'am ha'aretz means that from amongst the people you shall accept a carbon. Prat l'mummer. A mummer is out. So here's the question. These are two psukim that are, it's not necessary. What do I need two psukim for? Now, before we address the answer, the Gemara just is going to finish the brisa. Now, so the first pasuk, the first part of the brisa says a mummer is out. Then the Rav Shimon ben Yossi Omer Rav Shimon. It's appropriate. We're learning a Torah of Rav Shimon bar Yochai. I'm like, wait a minute. The Rav Shimon bar Yochai. Rav Shimon is always Rav Shimon bar Yochai. Rav Shimon says, Asher lo yisasena b'shgaga v'oshem. Hashav midiyasei maybe karban al shagasai. Ein hashav midiyasei ein maybe karban al shagasai. Rav Shimon bar Yochai said, here's my rule about whether we accept a carbon from you. Would you do tshuva if you were told about the sin, right? Let's say you're bringing a sin offering. It's an accident. Would you do tshuva if I told you about it? Meaning, would you refrain from doing it? If you're the type of person that doesn't care, so you're eating chazer, and I go over to you and say, and you want to bring a carbon, I say, yeah, but would you not eat chazer? No, I'm going to eat chazer. Now again, chatzos means you didn't know at the time. But what if someone at the time, as you're about to eat the pork, someone goes over to you and say, hey, you're not supposed to eat pork. If you're like, I don't care, we're not accepting your carbon, because you're a mummer. For that avero, you're out. But if you would say, oh, my bad, then we will accept your carbon. Okay, that's Rav Shimon bar Yochai's barometer. Here's the question: how is that different than a mummer? Like the Tanna Kama says, this pasuk excludes a mummer. Says Rav Shimon bar Yochai, no. It excludes someone who, if you were to tell him while he's doing the avera that it's a sin, he wouldn't stop. Okay, it's the same thing. Like, what exactly is the difference between the Tanna Kama and Rav Shimon bar Yochai? So says the Gemara, Amai benayu. Amrav Hamnuna Momer le'echol chaylev vehevi karban al adam ikabinayim. So I'll tell you the difference between the two. The difference is, what if I'm a person who I am not makbid on chazer? I keep all Torah Kula. I don't believe in chazer. I don't believe chazer is a problem. Okay. I specifically come to the Beis HaMikdash, and they say, what avera are you bringing a carbon for that you accidentally did? And you say, lobster. So here's the shaila. According to the Tanna Kama, because you're a mummer, you're out. Meaning, once you do that avera that you're not makbid on chazer, then you're out. I'm not bringing a carbon for chazer. I'm bringing a carbon for a lobster. You're out. Rav Shimon bar Yochai says, no. You have to ask him. The avera that he's about to do, ask him, would you have stopped? You see, if it was chazer, he would not have stopped. But if it was lobster, he would have stopped because he's generally makbid on lobster. Then he could bring a carbon. So it's a subtlety. Rav Shimon bar Yochai looks at the specific case as opposed to on a broader scale. Okay. The point is, though, you see from this sugya that this is a separate pasuk that's referring to a mummer. So the question is, why is it that the previous brisa said that a mummer doesn't bring a carbon is mikem v'loy kolchem l'hoitzias a mummer, but over here it's me'ama aretz. So what do you need 2 psukim for? So the Gemara says, Chada b'chatas v'chada ba'oila. One is to tell you that a mummer does not bring a chatas, and one is to tell you that a mummer does not bring an oila. And I'll tell you why each one is unique. A chatas is for a sin offering, and oila is a gift. I could argue both of them. If I just had a pasuk saying that a mummer does not bring a chatas, I would say, yeah, because he doesn't deserve atonement. He wants to bring a gift, we'll accept his gift. Or the opposite. If I just had a pasuk by an oila, I would say, I'm not taking a gift from a rasha. Atonement I'll help him do. I'll help him do tshuva. So each one, you need a pasuk to exclude both. Says the Gemara, chad b'chatas, chad ba'oila. Utzrichi, you need both. Yashbin chatas. If I only had chatas, I would say, mishum de la kaparahu, because the chatas is atonement, so he doesn't deserve atonement. Aval oila de dairenu, but an oila which is just a gift to Hashem, maybe we should accept it from a rasha. V'yashmin oila, and if we just had an oila, mishum de lav chiyuvahu, I would say an oila, it's optional, it's a gift. God doesn't need a gift right now. Aval chatas de chiyuvahu, but for an atonement, maybe we should help him. Tzrichi, therefore, both psukim tell you that you're out. Now the Gemara, just to finish up this discussion, we said before in the previous Amid that the word behema, min ha-behema, is to exclude a Jew. It's talking about a Jew who acts like a behema. That's the point. I thought the Gemara says, so basically, if I were to ask you right now, if the pasuk has a word behema regarding a person, it's a bad thing. It means you're acting like a behema. The truth is, I would argue that if you describe someone like a behema, it means they're humble. Like an animal. They look at themselves to Hashem like an animal. I would actually say maybe it's a good thing. So is describing a person like a behema a good thing or a bad thing? Says the Gemara, describing a person like a behema is a bad thing. But doesn't the pasuk say, Adam u behema teshia Hashem? Hashem saves man and animal. Pashtus, the pasuk is saying that Hashem will save an animal and Hashem will save a man. But says the Gemara, it's not the pshat. If a person is humble and he lowers himself to the ground like a behema, Hashem will save you. So you see that describing a person like a behema is a good thing, but yet we described in the previous Amid as a bad thing. So the Gemara says it depends on the lashon. If it just says behema, it's bad. If it says adam u behema, then it's good, because it means that the adam is acting like adam is humble like a behema. Then it's a good thing. The Gemara says hacha hasam ksiv adam u behema, hacha ksiv behema lechud. Okay, so it depends on the lashon. So the Gemara says, okay, Adam Behema is good, but now we have a pasuk that implies Adam Behema is bad. And is Adam Behema a good thing? is Arati as Beis Yisrael, Zera Adam is Zera Behema. The pasuk says that I will sow in the seeds of Klal Yisrael, the seed of man and the seed of animal. This is the pasuk is a pasuk in Yirmiyah. Now the seed of animal is talking about ignorant people. That's what Rashi says. So you see that Behema and Adam is no good. So the Gemara says, depends on the lashon. Adam u behema good. Zera Adam, zera behema, no good. So the Gemara says, hasam hachalke kra. Depends on how the lashon is brought up. If it's Adam u behema, it's good. But zera Adam, zera behema is no good. Now, just to finish up the discussion, we had yesterday that a kuti, whether a kuti can shecht, so we said like this, they are makbid on shchita, but they're not makbid on lifnei iver. They don't believe in lifnei iver. So while they will only eat very, very high certification of shchita, they'll serve you bad meat because they don't believe that there's a problem of being machshel yid. So the only way that a kuti can shecht is either you have to be standing there, you have to give him the knife and watch him. You have to watch him, or if you don't watch the shechita, you have to give him a piece of meat and he has to taste it. But l'chachila, the only way to do it is for you to be watching. Because if there's no mashkiach tamidi or yoytzev v'nichnas, whatever, if there's no mashkiach, they'll potentially, if they mess up, then they won't be makbid. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chanan, Amar Rav Yaakov bar Idi, Amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi Mishum bar Kapara. Rav Gamliel ubezdinoi nimna al shchitas kuti basrua. Rav Gamliel and his bezdin aser the shchita of a kuti. Now, what's the case? I told you before that shchita kuti is only okay if a mashkiach is there. So now that Rav Gamliel asered it, bezdin of Gamliel said you can't have the shchita of a kuti. What were they referring to? It must be they were referring to a case which is normally acceptable, i.e. there's a mashkiach, and they still asered it. Because if there's no mashkiach, you don't need Rav Gamliel to aser it. It's aser anyway. Comes the Gemara. Amarli Rav Zera, Rav Yaakov Eidi. Rav Zera said to Rav Yaakov Eidi, Shemali Shama Rebbe El Kashen Yisrael El Agabav. Maybe it's only a problem for a kuti. Maybe Bezdin of Rav Gamliel only asked it when there's no mashgiach. But if there's a mashgiach, it's okay. Meaning, he heard that Rav Gamliel said it's a problem. Rav Gamliel's Bezdin asked the shchit of a kuti. So Rav Zera said, maybe it's only a problem if there's no mashgiach. But if there's mashgiach, it's okay. So the Gemara says, Amar Lei, Rav Yaakov said about Rav Zera, Dami Haimer Rabbanan K'Talig Gemiri Inshi Mishmaita. It's like you never learned Torah before. Like how foolish of a point. You're saying what? That maybe it's only a problem if there's no mashgiach. If there's no mashgiach, it's always a problem. Bezdin of Rav Gamliel doesn't need to put their foot down to put down the aser, something that's already aser. If there's no mashgiach, avad it's a problem because the kuti don't believe in lifnei iver. Bezdin of Rav Gamliel will only aser a situation which is normally acceptable, which is there's a mashgiach, which is normally acceptable. Bezdin of Gamliel asked it. It says Rav Zera, maybe the only aser is no mashgiach. He says, no mashgiach, it's already aser. What are you talking about? It says the Gemara, remember, boy, do I need Bezdin of Rav Gamliel to ask there's no mashgiach? Of course there's no mashgiach, it's a problem. Bezdin of Rav Gamliel only asks it when there is a mashgiach. Oh. So now, here's the question. So Rav Zera started off the discussion thinking that it was only a problem if there's no mashgiach, and he got blasted. So the question is, did he accept that statement? Did Rav Zera walk away thinking that he himself was correct, or did he accept the point? So in other words, if you'd ask Rav Zera, if there's no mashgiach, if there's a mashgiach, is it a problem? At first Rav Zera thought if there's a mashgiach, it's fine. He got blasted. So the question is, did he accept that rebuke? So the Gemara says one with this, Kibble minei eloi kibble minei. Did Rav Zera accept this response? So in other words, if there is a mashgiach, would Rav Zera accept that Bezdin Rav Gamliel asered it, or would he stand by his guns and say that it's still fine, if there is a mashgiach? So the Gemara says the following proof. Tashema, the Omer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omer Rav Asi, Ani re'isi es Rav Yochanan she'achal meshchitas kuti. He said that Rav Yochanan once ate the meat of a kuti. The kuti shechted it, and he ate it. Now obviously we're talking about there's a mashgiach. V'af Rav Asi achal meshchitas kuti. V'toi bar Rav Zera. Rav Zera was wondering, this is the proof. Rav Zera, I'll say it outside and so we inside. Rav Zera said, Rav Zera hears that Rav Yochanan ate the shchit of a kuti. And Rav Zera said to himself, I have two choices as to how Rav Yochanan did this. Either Rav Yochanan was not aware that it's a problem, that Rav Bezdin of Rav Gamliel asked it, or he was aware and he disagrees. So the Gemara says, so Rav Zera said, I have a proof. To me, it makes more sense that he's aware and he disagrees. Again, there's two choices. Either he's not aware that it's aser, he's not aware that Rav Bezdin of Gamliel asered it, and what he's doing is technically wrong, but he's just not aware of it. Or he's aware that there's a statement that Rav Gamliel asered, but he disagrees. So Rav Zera said to himself, it makes more sense that he's aware and he disagrees. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu would never be machshel a tzaddik, that a tzaddik would put food in his mouth, even without his knowledge or intent. Rav Gamliel, Kadosh Baruch would never be machshel a tzaddik. As we're going to see later on in the Masechta, even a behema, Rav Pinchas ben Yair would not put any food in its mouth that was not kosher. So a tzaddik would definitely not. So there's no way Rav Yochanan will put food in his mouth if Rav Gamliel's Bezdin taka asered it. It must be Rav Yochanan knew of the shmua and disagreed. So the point is, you see from Rav Zera, he was obviously mekabel it. Because if Rav Zera stood by his guns that the whole thing is fake, then he wouldn't have had this back and forth. This whole back and forth is Rav Zera said, listen, I was told that Rav Gamliel asered it, and I accept that. Now Rav Yochanan is eating it. The two choices are, he is unaware of this teaching, or he disagrees. He says it makes more sense that he disagrees, because there's no way he would put food in his mouth that was asar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu would protect the tzaddik. So you see that Rav Zera obviously held it's a problem. Rav Zera obviously changed his mind, and he realized, even the mashgiach, it's a problem. Because if it's not a problem, then what's the whole conversation? It must be he accepted it's a problem, and he's saying, Rav Yochanan must disagree, because if Rav Yochanan is unaware of this, there's no way HaKadosh Baruch Hu would be machshel a tzaddik. So says the Gemara says, the Gemara says, Tali bar Rav Zera was wondering, Lo shmielu, is he unaware of this takana of Rav Gamliel? Do you have a shmielu, have a mekabel minei? But if he were aware, he would stop. Or perhaps he had heard about this and he disagrees about this statement. So how the Pashla Nashe, he resolved, it makes more sense that Rav Yochanan was aware of it and he disagrees. Do you have a shmiel, have a mekabel? Because if you want to say that he didn't know about this takana, but had he known, he would stop eating. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu protects the behem of a tzaddik, tzaddikim atzman lekol shekain, then a tzaddik himself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will protect Rav Yochanan. So the point is, the Gemara concludes, it's clear from Rav Zera's statement that he was mekabel, that that even when the mashgiach is standing on top of it, Rav Gamliel asered it, because if not, lishni like kadri solim el gav ken she'eni solim el gav of elav shma mina kivu minei shma mina. The fact that Rav Gamliel obviously, because if Rav Gamliel's takana, if Zera stood by his grounds that when there's a mashgiach there it's fine, then what's the problem? Why does he have to have this whole discussion with Rav Yechanan? It must be that he held that he was mekabelit, and therefore he says must be Rav Yechanan is not mekabelit. But to say that he's unaware, HaKadosh Baruch Hu not be machshel at tzaddik. I'll just tell you, it's not a raya to this. It's not this is not the source of his shita. But when Rav Belsky was going through the whole discussion of water in New York with the copepods and the bugs, he did say that he does not believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would allow Rav Moshe Feinstein and other tzaddikim, but he specified Rav Moshe, to say that Rav Moshe would drink bugs yom v'layla. He says, can it zayin that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would allow a tzaddik to be nichshel? So he says when you go into that was the mindset that when he went into the shiloh. That was okay.
How does the mashgiach help